let's see. So I don't use PDF, so is there like a view? Here we go. Here we go. Okay. Hi everybody, my name is Josie. My ARTA grant was over multimodal transit in London and Amsterdam, but before I begin, I really want to thank the Columbus Foundation. None of this would be possible without them. I want to thank all the Knowlton staff with all the logistics that go into this. It doesn't go unnoticed, thank you. And then I really want to thank my friend Luke, who really encouraged me to go out on a limb and apply for this grant. But before I begin, I want to introduce myself. Like Bertha said, I am Josie Stiver. I'm a City and Regional Planning major, 4th year with a minor in Community Engagement here at Knowlton. My interest within CRP lies within multimodal transit and what I believe is a current paradigm shift towards walkable communities and away from suburban sprawl. So my trip timeline and intention, I spent 5 days in London and then 5 days in a city called Haarlem, which is about an hour outside of Amsterdam. And I took 2-day trips by bicycle into Amsterdam. So my intention was to conduct an analysis of cycling infrastructure through a first-hand account, and some questions I would ask myself surround how can biking and public transit methods complement each other to create a seamless commute for residents and tourists alike, and what is the difference between being a resident in a city versus being a foreigner in the city, and how can the different transit methods benefit you in different ways. So my analysis focused on 4 key factors, the first one being road conditions. This is things like material of the road, the width of the road, steepness, and lighting. So in this picture here, you can see the bricks are where pedestrians are supposed to be, and then the paved lanes are where the cycling is supposed to be happening. And the second factor is navigability, which is really important as a foreigner in different cities. This means things like signage, then also GPS. Did my Google Maps get me around the city successfully? And then the next 2 factors are arguably more important in my opinion. Things like amenities, especially on a bike, things like rest stops, restaurants, and scenery. Scenery is kind of broad, but is there emissions in your face when you're riding your bike, or is it kind of a meandering path through a nice field like this one? And then there's also things like, the Dutch people are very creative when it comes to cycling amenities. This is a trash can that you can throw your trash in as you're moving, you don't have to stop. So things like that make cycling really, really easy. The next and most important in my opinion is safety. This is things like speed of vehicular traffic, the volume of that traffic, different mode separations, and then a specific focus on intersections because that's where most accidents happen. So in this picture you can see that the pedestrians are separated from the cycling through this plastic flex post, and then the cycling separated by the vehicular traffic through this dotted curb, which in my opinion is a really successful safety measure. So first I went to London, and in London I focused more on the tube because that's their most extensive mode of transit. I took a tour of the Shepherd's Bush tube station through the Transit for London Museum, and it was really, really neat because there's a retired portion of this tube station and then an active portion of the tube station, and there's also these ventilation shafts, which this is where I was standing here. Like I said, this is an active tube station, so what happens is that the train comes in and it pushes all the old air through these ventilation tubes, and then when the train leaves, it pulls in fresh air into the station. So standing in these tube stations, or in these ventilation tubes, when the trains were coming in and out was a really, really neat experience. All these different stations have a big historic significance to the city, and they're all unique to each neighborhood, yet there's a cohesive brand across London, which I'll touch on in a minute. Another big culture shock as American is that residents value public transit, and you know that, but when you're actually there, seeing it in person, it's a different experience. There's this positive feedback loop that happens of people don't really fight when it gets invested into because it benefits them. So when it benefits them and it gets invested into, it's more reliable, which means more people use it, and it's just this positive feedback loop. And people really value the tube, and they also have these historic plaques around each station where it really highlights the historic significance, and it creates a sense of place throughout the city as well. These tube stations were also used as bomb shelters during the war, and that also plays into why transit is valued so much within London. So I told you guys my intention of the trip, and it was not to study city branding, but it's absolutely impossible to ignore London's brand. Transit for London has a museum as well, and they have this huge exhibit over branding. This is the roundel, also known as the bullseye, and then this is Johnson font, and that is known as London's handwriting. So it's absolutely all over the place. Transit for London owns every single mode of transit. They own the tube, the bus, they even have ferries, and then they have this really huge fleet of bike share. So they use their continuous brand through all the different modes of transit, which really creates a cohesive experience, especially as a foreigner in the city. So Johnson's font is known as London's handwriting. That's how extensive it is. It's on every map, every brochure. This is one of the best known corporate brands in the world. And the cohesive branding really creates a city that gets you from place to place quickly and safely. And because one company owns all the different transit methods, they're able to strategically place them to complement each other, which I'll talk about again in a second. So on to some not so great things about London Transit. They had a bunch of these shared bike bus lanes, which sound good in theory, but in practice they're not so great because their bus transit is so reliable and so extensive that their buses overtake the bike lane every single time, because a double-decker red bus versus a bike, the bus is going to win every single time. So it also brings up this question of is paint infrastructure, which I know is kind of a controversial topic, but you can see here, I think paint is not infrastructure. Nothing's forcing this bus to not overtake this space, and it really creates an unsafe experience for cyclists. Another issue is that bike share is causing pedestrian access issues, which I don't think is uncommon for us as people that live in Columbus. We see this seen a lot when it comes to bike share being parked in the middle of the sidewalk, and also these electric scooters being parked in the middle of the sidewalk. This sidewalk is probably about 15 feet, 20 feet wide, which should be really awesome as a pedestrian, but when it's all clogged up, it becomes a real problem. If I was in a wheelchair, I would never be able to get through here. There's also a strong demand for cycling infrastructure, even though I believe personally that the infrastructure doesn't support the current demand. You can see here, like in these lanes that I wouldn't deem adequate, there were still a lot of cyclists. In a lane that I would deem adequate like this, you have great separation from the cars, from pedestrians. It was super well utilized. And then, like I mentioned previously, Transit for London owns these huge fleets of bike shares, and they place them strategically outside the tube stations. So here's the tube station, the bike share is right outside. It makes it really easy to use all the different modes cohesively. So switching modes into Amsterdam, super famous bike first paradigm in Amsterdam. Obviously that's not a revelation, but being there in person is an absolutely different experience than learning about it in the classroom or through a textbook. I remember my first day I was making a left turn on 5 lanes of auto traffic, which is kind of uncommon in Amsterdam. I stopped, I was the only bike cars moving. I went to change my music on my phone and I looked up and I was getting yelled at because every single car stopped for me, and it was just something I was not expecting. The drivers are very, they know that there's cyclists everywhere and they're very aware of the different cyclists, so it feels safe, even though there is a lot of separation. When there's not separation, it still feels safe. Because of this right-of-way, well also, as a pedestrian, it's very obvious that the cyclists get the right-of-way. You learn that very quickly. You gotta get out of the cyclist way. But because of this right-of-way, biking was the easiest way to get from place to place because you never really had to stop for anybody else. That being said, as a pedestrian, cycling really overwhelmed the public realm. You can see that here in this picture. This side of the curb is where cars and bikes are supposed to be, and then this over here where I was standing is where pedestrians are supposed to be. And you can't walk here because there's people moving, and you can barely walk here because there's so much bike parking. So that was a kind of an issue that I noticed in Amsterdam. Another big issue in Amsterdam, which is their most controversial topic right now, are these things called microcars, which are terrifying. They're really unregulated right now, and they move just as fast as cars, but they weave through every mode of transit. So they can go on the sidewalk, they go in the bike lane, and they go on the street, and they're really unpredictable, and they weave in and out, and I almost got killed a few times by those things, so beware if you're ever in Amsterdam. Okay, so I think every architecture or city and regional planning major has this like dream project that they would love to see, and this was mine. I don't speak Dutch, but it's Boulevard and Stationsplein, underwater bicycle parking at Amsterdam Central Station. So the way it works, there's a picture of me fangirling, but the way it works is here's Amsterdam Central. You can take your bike down these long escalators underwater, here's the water, and you enter these huge long roads of double-decker bike parking. And being able to see this in person, I've studied this, like I've followed this project for a really long time since it was proposed. It opened a few months before I got to see it, so I got to see it fresh and in action. It's super well utilized. There's all these different rows of cycling parking. It's double decker, so you can see the green light means that there's space, the red light means it's full. You pull out these trays, move them down their springs, so you can move your bike up really easily, and it's absolutely free. So it's super accessible to the residents of Amsterdam. Like I said, the city of Amsterdam knows that cycling parking is overwhelming their city, so they come up with these really creative solutions to fix that. And because it's at Amsterdam Central, all the different trams go through here, all the buses go through here, all the trains go through here, and now you can park your bike here. So it's really common to see commuters come into Amsterdam Central, park their bike for free, or get into Amsterdam Central, get their bike, go to work, go get their bike back, park it for free, get back on the train, go home. So it really creates a seamless commute. So the most analytical part of my trip was definitely my day trips from Haarlem to Amsterdam. I did it twice. Like I said, Haarlem's a city about an hour bike ride outside of Amsterdam. So it's an hour-long ride each way, and through my trips, I went through rural, industrial, and suburban districts, and all the different districts accommodated the bike as a viable mode of transit through different amenities. In the States here, it's pretty common to see city biking, well, kind of common to see city biking. It's not that common to see suburban biking infrastructure, and it's definitely not common to see rural biking infrastructure. But in Amsterdam, it was really, really common, and they all did it a little bit differently. So you can see here, this is kind of the rural path that I went down. These were more urban and then suburban. I want to touch on transit-oriented development really fast because they did this really well. So this is what they call a cycle highway right next to the car highway, and they also have it through the as a train station as well. So the train, the cars, and the bikes all follow the same path, and they have stops along the way for every single mode of transit, so it's really easy to use all the different modes. They focus a lot of cycling parking. Like you can see here, it's absolutely unreal how much cycling parking is at the different train stations and how well it's utilized every single time. So it's really easy to come, park your bike, get on the train, go into the central station. They also have construction as well. And when I saw this at first, I thought I was gonna have to take a detour because all the signs are in Dutch. I was like getting my Google Translate out and everything, thinking I was gonna have to find a new way. And then I saw this lady ride her moped straight through the construction zone, and I thought, well, if she did it, I could do it too. So then I went through all the construction zones. Like I said, bikes get the right of way literally over everything, even over the bulldozers. So some conclusions I came to at the end of my trip is that consistent signage and branding amongst different forms of transit really create a cohesive and coherent city, especially as a foreigner in these cities. And then next, separation amongst forms of transit create a sense of security. This means things like bollards, flex posts, grade changes, not paint. Paint's not infrastructure, which I think we could really work on in the States. And then next, amenities are crucial in creating a place where different forms of transit are valued, specifically cycling. It was really common to see in Amsterdam stairs and then a slight ramp on the other side to pull your bike up the stairs. Small things like that really create a space where cycling is valued as a form of transit. And then next, parking should congregate at transit hubs, obviously, but it should not take over the public realm, which is really important. I think in the States we have so much parking, surface parking just absolutely obliterates the public realm to the point where there's almost no public realm at all. But we should be able to come up with creative solutions to make sure that we can still utilize these multimodal forms of transit, but without taking away from what really matters. And then last, I just want to thank the Columbus Foundation again for funding this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to expand my worldview and explore my passion for multimodal transit. Then if you guys have any questions, that's my name number. I'm Stiver.39. Set you up. Now I know.
Thank you, Josie. Also, thank you to the Columbus Foundation. Thank you to the faculty and staff. Thanks to the Palestinians and the Israelis that helped me while I was on my trip, and also thanks to my parents. The recent events in Israel and Palestine, while they may seem distant or complex, have a significant impact on our world. Despite our government spending billions of dollars to Israel every year, many of us haven't seen or know what the landscape looks like. After perceiving and witnessing both the Palestinian and Israeli landscapes, my goal is to share my reflections and hopefully guide fellow landscape architects in navigating our changing world. In this presentation, I'll share my research on landscape design practices within occupied Palestine, specifically in Battir. The ethnographic and fieldwork I conducted is intended to contribute to the ongoing discourse among landscape architects as we continue to continually redefine the boundaries of our work. In a part of the world that frequently garners international attention, the actions of Palestinians and Israelis in this historic landscape have moral and political implications for how we perceive land, humans, and key issues such as climate change or world hunger. Just as we acknowledge the history of the indigenous peoples here in America, we must also acknowledge the history of the land prior to the establishment of the State of Israel. This map from the Library of Congress and many like it acknowledge the presence of the Palestinian people. In 1948, the Nakba, or catastrophe, was an event that led to the displacement of 750,000 Palestinians from their native homeland. Today, there are approximately 6 million Palestinians living in diaspora. The areas marked in red signify the growing Israeli settlements. Palestinians and their allies are extremely vocal about the past and ongoing events in Palestine. While the focus of this presentation is not to delve into all the history, although incredibly important, my point of reference is the Palestinian voices we hear today that are actively influencing our individual, civil society, and political authorities' positions on our most fundamental ideals such as life, liberty, and of course, land. Following the Second Intifada, Israel decided to construct a wall that would divide the occupied West Bank and Israel, contributing to what many experts, including Israeli architect Eyal Weizman, calls apartheid architecture. Prior to visiting Israel and Palestine, I found lots of information about Battir through the United Nations and online publications such as Places Journal. Battir, sometimes called the Garden of Jerusalem, is a village in Bethlehem with a relatively small population of approximately 10,000 people. The village is internationally known for its Roman pool, terraces, and baths, which function to this day, but also for its delicious eggplant and crops. When plans to build the apartheid wall through the village of Battir were revealed by the Israeli government, the local community raised their objections to the United Nations due to the village's rich culture and historical significance. While Israeli projects are meticulously planned, designed, and documented through technical drawings, Palestinian villages tend to be more informal and may not align with the many design expectations prevalent in our own society. Thus, through the technical expertise of the Battiris and the advocacy of the United Nations, the village was able to redefine itself as a technical landscape, properly defining the boundaries of the history and documenting ecological significance of the landscape. In 2014, Battir was declared as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it was concluded in international courts that building the wall would cause irreparable damage to the land. At the edges of every landscape, you'll find points of entry, and for nation-states, these entry points are often airports. The entry point into Israel was the Tel Aviv Ben Gurion Airport. While the experience of traveling from the United States to the Middle East is not new to me, visiting Israel was an exceptional journey. Despite being born a U.S. citizen, my arrival in Israel was met with skepticism. I was held for approximately 2.5 hours at security before being allowed to enter. During this time, I underwent rigorous interrogation about my lineage, religion, political views, my relationship with Palestinians, and even had my phone searched. I was even asked, why would a landscape architect take interest in our land? I couldn't help but wonder why my visit was any more unique than the thousands of internationals passing through that day. Perhaps there is something inherently powerful or unique about landscape architecture which draws authorities' attention. Once I had satisfactorily answered the security questions posed by the customs officer, I was handed a visa, which turned out to be my sole form of documentation recognized by Israeli police and military once I was within the country. At the heart of the Palestinian landscape lies Jerusalem, a city with global and international significance. It's a place that literally means the city of peace, which is ironic considering the presence of deep-rooted trauma. Despite this irony, Jerusalem is truly a city of peace, attracting millions of pilgrims from the 3 Abrahamic religions every year to visit the sacred land. We are what we eat. In Palestinian culture, food carries dimensions of both sacredness and trauma. The majority of dishes you find spread out on a table incorporate olives or olive oil. The olive tree holds significant cultural symbolism for Palestinians, representing resistance as it is known for its longevity and its ability to stand tall against the relentless passage of time. Muslim Palestinians begin their meals by saying in Arabic, Bismillah, or in the name of God, further reinforcing that their nutrition is to make them physically and spiritually resilient. The Palestinian culture is not only reflected in their agriculture, but also in their everyday experiences. While traveling across Palestine, Palestinians encounter delays at checkpoints, where they face questioning and extra screening. A notable incident occurred when my friend Wissam, a U.S. citizen in OSU Buckeye, and I wanted to visit Jaffa to experience the Mediterranean Sea. We were held at an Israeli checkpoint for almost 3 hours without any explanation. After numerous phone calls to the U.S. Embassy to secure our release, I was eventually allowed to return to the West Bank. However, Wissam was taken by the Israeli military to a military base for further questioning. When I went to pick him up from a village about an hour away, the reason we were not allowed through became clear. Wissam didn't possess a Visa card like mine. And I'll step away from the script just for a second. That's actually Wissam right there being carried into the vehicle to be taken to the military base. The following day, I traveled to Jaffa on the Israeli side. The presence of westernized modern landscape architecture was evident in the waterfront design, which I found beautiful. However, the experience felt empty without my Palestinian friend. Even more painful was looking out on the water and knowing that before the Nakba, Palestinians like Wissam were once fishing here undisturbed. Despite the unfortunate events that Palestinians experience daily, life continues. Wissam's older brother was getting married, and despite the traumatic experience from 2 days ago, we still managed to have a great time and celebrate the special occasion. However, the Israeli checkpoints persist, and the memories of the Nakba linger. This restriction of liberty undoubtedly influences Palestinians' contributions to public discourse worldwide regarding what it truly means to be free. As landscape architects, how might we fulfill new standards and expectations of liberty that either challenge or conform to attitudes of national security or anti-terrorism? How might the narrative of Palestinians' historic claim to the lands conflict or converge with ambitious modern projects? Up to this point, I've been offering context about the land surrounding Battir. It's important to note that Battir is situated within the West Bank, but falls under what's referred to as Area C. Area C designates that this land is intended for Palestinians, yet is under Israeli civic and military control. Consequently, any interventions on the landscape necessitate Israeli approval to ensure any developments do not threaten Israeli security. However, till this day, extrajudicial settlements of Israelis continue to encroach upon this land that was once promised to Palestinians. Within Battir, numerous artesian springs are located, around which the Romans built their settlements. One of these springs features a bath that villagers occasionally use to escape the heat of the sun. This very water source is employed to irrigate Palestinian crops through an intricate network of channels that nourishes the terraces where villagers cultivate their crops. Despite the long-standing use of the spring and terraces for centuries, the Palestinians' plea to not build the wall went unrecognized by Israeli courts until the UN became involved. The Palestinians worked tirelessly day and night to compile technical drawings that would document their landscape and present it before the United Nations. This effort was necessary because Israel had not recognized their indigenous knowledge of the landscape, which spans a millennium, and the potential damage that the wall could inflict on the historical, aesthetic, and ecological assets within the land. These drawings not only helped the Palestinian Battiris in preserving their cultural and ecological heritage, but also enabled them to embark on a progressive and innovative projects on their landscape that align with their cultural identity. These projects include creating trails, mountaintop restaurants, vibrant murals, and outdoor guest houses. During my visit, I also observed 2 young boys carrying their bike up the terraces, which suggests a need for bike trails to make the village more youth-friendly. Despite the techno-agrarian advancements of Israelis, Palestinians in places like Battir continue to embrace traditional methods of tending to their plants and crops, much like their ancestors did. While there may be interest in adopting commercial agriculture in other parts of Palestine, most Palestinians, especially in Battir, are committed to using the same ancient tools and watering systems for their crops. These ancestral methods serve as a powerful connection to their legacy and heritage tied to their land, and in some ways, a therapeutic practice to soothe past traumas. Despite the availability of forms of modern building, the retaining walls that bolster the terraces stand as remarkable assets, enhancing the beauty and tranquility of the landscape. As a result, beauty plays an immensely important role in the dimension of resistance landscapes that Palestinians employ to assert their rightful connection to the land. Although the United Nations plays a pivotal role in the preservation of Battir, a network of Palestinian organizations also exists, dedicated to ongoing research and safeguarding of their land. These organizations play a critical role in showcasing Palestinians' understanding of the landscape and advocating for the preservation of native and indigenous species. They actively combat invasive species like the Aleppo pine, which are spread by Israelis but resolutely resisted by Palestinians. If not for the Israeli checkpoints and walls, a trip to Al-Aqsa for Jummah would only take about 20 minutes. However, the current transportation system demands around 1 hour, factoring in bus delays and Israeli searches. The sacred weekly ritual of Jummah, or Friday service, which draws Palestinians and Muslims from all around the world, evolves into a significant social network that blends and spreads culture, norms, and attitudes. How might ideas of resistance or understanding of landscape circulate through ritual communal worship? The presence of Israeli walls only serves to reinforce Palestinian attitudes towards resistance, drawing, documenting, and photographing all forms of resistance for Palestinians. How might these activities be applied in our own communities to resist policies that harm communities everywhere? How can landscape architects work in tandem with activists and political movements to secure the well-being of their people? How might landscape architects challenge the monopolizing power of nation states? I envision landscape architects playing a significant role in what I like to term resistance landscape architecture. As Palestinians resist political pressure to relinquish their land, arms, and right to self-determination, they will continue to make interventions in the landscape which often aggravates power. These interventions are meant to showcase their dignity and humanity, but most importantly, their existence, which is often under threat of erasure and silence. Allow me to introduce Nadia Mustafa, the daughter of Hassan Mustafa, a hero and symbol of resistance for the people of Battir during the Nakba. Her perspective on the landscape differs from that of the younger generations, although sharing similar sentiments and goals of resistance to the occupation. This underscores that development of landscapes of resistance is not solely a response to colonialism, but also a discourse among those who resist occupation spanning multiple generations. I also had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Jeff Halper, an Israeli-American and author of Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine. He collaborates with Palestinian academics to explore new political models for Palestinians and Israelis to coexist in peace. If a new world order were to emerge, how might the professional and public services provided by landscape architects evolve under this revised political and civil system? Nearly 100 days have passed since my visit. As the situation continues to unfold, we can expect to see more symbols of resistance prop up in our own backyard. As landscape architects, we should try to pay attention to these trends and think about how they impact our own work. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that while the cause of Palestinian rights is currently my primary focus in terms of activism, it's important to recognize that not everyone is expected to feel or act in the same way given our diverse backgrounds. To those who have spoken up, I won't forget your courage and humanity, standing up to a mainstream narrative which too often dehumanizes my Arab brothers and sisters. However, in our times, political apathy is inexcusable. We should all have one or two causes that we support to contribute to making our world a better place. Thus, in some regards, we all have an important role to play in designing resistance landscapes. Thank you.